Last time on Bahoopla.
Rylan, I have a mission for you.
Oh gosh, what is it now?
I have someone for you to fight.
Okay, we're not doing this stupid to-be-continued thing.
Wait, why not?
Well, I just don't want to.
Well, you're the one that added that stupid to-be-continued meme, so you better do it.
Oh, shut up, you! I hate that you're always interrupting my videos!
Gosh, man. Why do you always have to resort to violence in your videos? Don't you know the kids are watching?
The kids?!
You fucking faggot!
Dude, kids are freaking edgy these days!
Why?
Jeez, finally, he's gone! Gosh, now I have to clean up this mess.
So he finally made his move, huh? Mike, send in the absolute worst that we have.
Wait, you mean even that?
Yes, send in everything. He's a fierce opponent. That Bahoopla kid won't succeed this time.
Hi there! Have you ever gotten so crazy about missing games to the point where you literally go insane when you hear your favorite soundtrack? Oh, hell yeah! I'm horny right now! Yeah, like that guy, which, I think he's slowly dying right now. But never mind that. Let's talk history! Come on, Wikipedia, don't fail me.
So right now the year is 2018, but let's step back to the early 70s when every home console was a Pong clone, and when video games sounded like this. Yeah, Pong sounds pretty boring, but fast forward to the late 70s and you begin to hear a variety of sounds utilized in many more games. These sounds consisted of explosions, environmental sounds, and
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Oh, the titties!
Anyways, after all these improvements that came in the 70s in terms of the sound department came games that try to create background music. One of these games was Space Invaders. Here, take a listen. The music in this game takes an eerie approach by increasing the speed of the soundtrack as the invaders approach the player, which at the time was very revolutionary, because in the 70s, most computers and video game machines did not have sound chips. Instead, most machines required sound to be produced through the machine's CPU.
Anyways, that was video game music in the 70s, but fast forward to the 80s and you begin to see... What the heck, bro? Why does my dang Atari have crappy music like those arcade games? Is that a dead body? Yeah, just ignore the body. Well, aren't you gonna clean it up or something? I mean, I bet this broom here could help. No, man, I appreciate the offer, but I mean, I also have this trash bag, this shovel, this banana, this chicken, and ooh! How about this saw? We could chop that guy's ass in half! Shut up, or else you'll end up like that guy, only with your ass chopped in half! Oh no, I actually like my ass! Looks like someone did shut up after I made my statement!
No!
Alright. Now with him dead, we won't have any more interruptions.
Anyways, this guy actually had a good point in terms of video game music. You see, home consoles such as the Atari 2600 had hardware limitations that made it very difficult to create continuous background music. One of these hardware limitations was sound chips used in consoles at the time, such as the Atari 2600. Now the Atari had a chip called the Atari TIA, and this chip allowed the Atari to have two voices that would be used to organize sound. The downside to using this chip, however, is that the Atari TIA also controlled the screen display and reading input of controllers. Now of course you could still make music with this chip, but to do so you'd have to have very little going on screen while music is playing. Here's an example of something you could do with the Atari TIA chip. looking at here is the two voice channels that are producing sound, and these two channels can only produce square waves. With this kind of limitation, it's honestly pretty impressive that many composers can make nice sounding music with this hardware limitation.
There! I explained it! Are you happy now, dead guy? I'll just take that as a yes.
Jumping to the 80s, we were introduced to several technological advances. For example, by the 80s, most computers and video game consoles, such as the Commodore 64 and SG-1000, had sound chips by this point in time. Now I could go on talking about other systems during the 80s, but I bet you're wondering about the Nintendo Entertainment System, so let's talk about that. Now the NES had several games such as Super Mario Bros., Metroid, Zelda, Castlevania, Kirby, Mega Man, etc. And all these games had background music that accompanied the gameplay. To accomplish this, the Rico 2A03 chip was used as a sound chip for the NES. This chip allowed the NES to utilize 5 sound channels. The first 2 channels produced square waves. These channels were typically used to create melodies that you hear in games. Next up is the third channel, which could produce triangular waves. These waves were normally used for the bass in soundtracks. Now we're at the fourth channel. The fourth channel could only produce noise, similar to that of static on a TV screen. Finally, we have the fifth channel. This channel was only capable of producing sample sounds. As a result, this channel wasn't typically used to create music. Once you have all individual channels combined together, you'll have a soundtrack that sounds like this.
Phew! That was a lot going on in there in the third generation, and as consoles continue to be released, several more changes occurred in terms of the... Oh, come on, who could it be now? Alright, now who's the one that knocked on this door? Look behind you. Oh my gosh!
Peekaboo.
Rylan! Avenge me!
Oh my gosh, this incarnation of me just died in front of me, and now the Luigi doll's pointing a gun at me. Oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? I have to make a decision!
Nah, I don't feel like it.
Moving on to the fourth generation of consoles, we had the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, which were the most popular systems at the time, and these consoles had more audio capability than the previous generation. One example of an improvement was the increase of audio channels, with the Sega Genesis having 6 channels and the Super Nintendo having 8 channels. This generation is interesting because we can compare the soundtracks between the two consoles and hear a distinct difference. Here, take a listen. During the fourth generation of consoles, you could also begin to hear clear human voices, unlike the last generation. This was somewhat taken advantage of in games such as Earthworm Jim, but here's a quick example of human speech in the fourth and third generation hardware.
Bubsy, 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 Bobcat!
Yeah!
Now before moving on to the last major segment of the video, you're probably wondering about portable consoles, and oh my gosh, there's a whole lot to cover. So I'll just save that for another.
Hey, I'm still here, you know.
Oh yeah!
So are you gonna do something about it or something?
Finally, we're at the 5th generation of consoles. And with this generation, we had the Sony PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and the Sega Saturn. Now this generation in terms of music wasn't tremendously different from the 4th generation, or at least when it comes to the Super Nintendo. Here, just take a listen. Now, of course, there were improvements, most notably in the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, because these consoles used CD technology, therefore allowing games to utilize CD quality audio. Not every system in the 5th generation could utilize CD quality audio, however, because the Nintendo 64 used cartridges. And not only that, but the Nintendo 64 also did not have an independent sound processor unlike the Sony PlayStation. This basically meant that the Nintendo 64 had to use its system's CPU to create sound, similar to how I explained the creation of sound in older hardware. After this generation, the improvements in music became less and less noticeable, until the 7th generation, where you could no longer recognize the difference in music in comparison to newly released consoles. So just for fun, let's take a listen to the difference between the 5th and 8th generation.
Well, that's about all I had left to say for the 5th generation, and with nothing else to say. Oh my gosh, what the hell is that? Oh gosh, I forgot to talk about all the bad music throughout the history of video games. Like Hong Kong 97. Oh crap, shooting, it's not working. Oh gosh, how am I gonna stop this stupid thing?
Hello, Rylan. Yes, I can help you. But on one condition.
Yes! Fine, whatever! Just tell me what it is!
Okay, so what I need you to do is to assemble the Dragon Balls. Nice.
Can you turn that horrendous music back on?
No, Rylan, don't do it!
I'm gonna kill myself!
Well, at least I won.